What's up, Banter fam? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Miles, and the biggest airdrop in crypto history has just taken place, with over $1 billion worth of ARB tokens airdropped to lucky participants. In today's show, we're going to be talking about the best ways to trade the Arbitrum airdrop, if there's opportunities in Arbitrum in the ecosystem, what plan I am using to attack Arbitrum now that it has finally launched, and we can see the price action. To be honest, it hasn't been as volatile as I expected, but we still had a relatively choppy market. It's around $1.30 at the moment. It actually launched at one point at $100 when the spot market first launched, but that's natural due to a lack of liquidity. So I want to talk about what my plan is with Arbitrum now that it's $1.30, and I have a very special guest joining the show to talk about his trading strategy and his general thoughts and views on the market. So hopefully that can give you guys some more clarity over where we currently sit, because right now it is a crazy time in crypto. We've obviously had a pretty nuts week. The SEC subpoenaed Sushi Swap. Then we had the FOMC obviously coming in at 25 basis points. The FOMC was a major mover of markets. It was actually a mover of Bitcoin to the upside until, of course, Janet Yellen spoke and said that they're no longer considering backstopping all deposits. Then we saw a Bitcoin sell-off, followed by a Wells notice that Coinbase received by the SEC. So the SEC continues to attack. But basically, FOMC, it was pretty much in line with expectations at 25 bips. I think the only thing that spooked markets a little bit on the day, as we discussed yesterday, was the fact some of Jerome Powell's wording was slightly more hawkish than anticipated. And he said they're not anticipating any rate cuts until 2024. But this is contradictory to what the market thinks, anticipating a 100 bips worth of rate cuts by the end of the year. So it's a little bit different and misaligned. I think that's largely because the market is assuming that banking contagion could continue to spread, and that will impact the Fed's ability to keep hiking rates. So that is certainly something to watch, as the macro is so dominant over crypto at the moment, but it was relatively in line with expectations. I just think Janet Yellen spooked the market a little bit, and then we had the Coinbase news coming out. Then after that, we also saw Do Kwon got arrested. So that was another big development, but I think that news was largely overshadowed by of course, the Arbitrum airdrop, which failed at first, and then finally people were able to claim, and now we sit here today wondering, how do we trade this thing? And that's obviously something we're going to talk about in today's show. Just a couple of updates before we bring the guest onto the stage. I want to talk about, just for a second, the crazy amount of cash that the Fed is printing. We've obviously seen their balance sheet over the last 2 weeks increase to counteract what is almost 4 to 5 months worth of quantitative tightening, which is pretty crazy. It's not a direct response to monetary policy, but it is a liquidity program, a loan program to banks, which of course is going to have some injection or flow-on effects into the broader economy. We can see that emergency cash is printing at 3x the levels seen in 2020. So they are really trying hard here to backstop the banks and shore up US dollar liquidity. And that's obviously in the face of what we've, what I would call like a slight global shift in terms of the US dollar over the last couple of weeks, with multiple trade alliances being struck in non-USD currencies like yuan and rubles. We saw Putin, for example, struck a deal with China to settle transactions in different currencies and not US. And we've also seen the same thing across Africa, Asia, and some other markets as well. So we're seeing some crazy stuff happen in the global scene. A bit of a currency war, in my opinion, starting to brew. And the US seems to be scrambling a little bit to shore up liquidity. And obviously, in the face of a banking collapse, they need to try and do something. But that's resulted in more money printing, essentially. And it's an oversimplification, but essentially that's what it is. And clearly, Bitcoin has responded very positively to that, because Bitcoin is being treated, at least right now, as a flight to safety / digital gold in the face of adversity. Now, how long this continues to last, how long this decorrelation lasts, that is the real question, because that will largely dictate the extent of this crypto rally. One thing I will say is that over the last day, correlation did have an uptick, because what we saw was the S&P pump. Obviously, then Bitcoin also pumped to the upside. We also saw a slight sell-off in the S&P. Bitcoin also sold off from its daily highs of 28.8. We're currently at 28.3. However, the sell-off still didn't reverse the entire candle. So Bitcoin did hold up better than equities today. And obviously, the market did increase as a result. So that's where Bitcoin's currently sitting. I'd say overall, we're still heading into what I would call pretty significant resistance, especially in this 28.7 to 29K region up here. And then, of course, you've got your next targets of 30 to 32K. That's a very strong resistance zone. So far, the alts still haven't shown a whole lot of strength, although we did get a slight bounce on the Ethereum chart. We did get on the Ethereum BTC chart, that is. We did get a rejection, by the way, off the 0.064 level. This is a key level for ETH BTC. We can see, we had multiple tests as support, and then it was the level that eventually broke down and resulted in the sell-off around the lunar period where ETH hit its lows and pre-FTX lows. And then we also saw this level become, a major level of support in the September post-ETH merge sell-off as well. So this is a key level for me that ETH would need to flip to signal to me that altcoins are starting to show some strength. Still haven't flipped it. Did have a slight push up from the lows, which is a solid sign, but I would still need to see like a really strong close above this level for me to consider the rotation is starting to take place right now. It still really is Bitcoin's time to shine until proven otherwise, although ETH did have a nice pump and it is starting to close above its range high, which is a slightly suppressed or delayed range high from the Bitcoin range high, which hit much earlier because Bitcoin has shown a lot more strength than Ethereum over the last few days. So now onto the Arbitrum discussion. Arbitrum did kind of have a bit of a messed up launch. So it's pretty crazy that with months of preparation, assuming the Arbitrum team exhibited months of preparation, that we still got issues upon launch. And it had a lot of people panicking at first. Luckily, the issues subsided. But basically what it was you couldn't claim Arbitrum on the Arbitrum Foundation page because just the amount of sheer pressure on the servers and on Infura caused an inability for people to actually get their Arbitrum. So basically the website went down. Then we also saw Arbiscan went down, which is Arbitrum's main scanner. And the token was very volatile at that time because there wasn't a lot of markets with liquidity. So you saw spot markets when they first opened on Bybit launching at $106. And I actually saw on-chain and also on some of the exchanges orders filling at like $10 to $15. So there were Arbitrum holders that actually got out at $10 to $15. If you were a holder of Arbitrum and you're kicking yourself because you weren't able to sell and get out for $5 to $10, don't kick yourself because most people, the vast majority of people, weren't able to claim and sell until the token was at least $1.50. So the people that got out and were able to, withdraw onto an exchange really early, those guys were lucky. A lot of the initial transactions were actually bot driven. So there was a lot of bots that had pre-programmed sells and pre-programmed claiming mechanisms, and those were the first guys out. So if you didn't get out in time and you didn't sell for $5 to $10, don't kick yourself because it's very actually difficult to, in practice, get that price. And I'm actually holding all of my Arbitrum tokens still. I haven't sold any. Of course, we're going to get into the plan with what I'm doing in that, and also when we get our guest on here, we'll have a discussion about Arbitrum as well. But it did settle, of course, after some pretty volatile initial price action at around $1.40. And this is fairly in line, actually, with the prediction that I made last week. I said it was likely to settle around the Optimism price, which at the time was $1.10. Optimism did increase since then, so we could put it around $1.20. And Arbitrum having a slight premium attached due to being what is probably the stronger network from a fundamental level, obviously is settled a little bit higher than Optimism. So the question we got to ask ourselves now is this fair value at 140, or do we see potentially people that didn't get into Arbitrum once some of the selling subsides start to get in, and we see a price push up like we saw with Aptos and Blur, and Optimism is actually a great example of this. So that's something we're going to discuss because there is potential for that. We just got to work out what rough level we think buyers will become like significantly interested. I think the 120 level, just straight off the bat, is a really key level for Arbitrum, not due to price action because we only have like 6 hours worth of price action. Just psychologically, I've heard that number floating around with quite a lot of crypto VCs and funds that I've been talking to. So I think that's a major number, but of course, you can kind of play the range. So it might be $1 to 120. Funds won't just ape in at one level. They'll kind of have a dedicated level where they decide to enter and then DCA into the market over time. So in terms of the claimees, 63.7% of the Arbitrum tokens have been claimed. At first, it was only like 10 to 20%, obviously, with the issues initially. Then we saw 63% of tokens claimed. I expect this ratio to go all the way up to 90 to 95% over the next day or so. With the Blur airdrop, I think by day 3, we're on 90 to 95%. So we should also get there with Arbitrum, probably even later today or tomorrow. And that will mean the majority of the so-called liquidity injection at that point should be over, at least for the Arbitrum ecosystem. Obviously, we're not talking about the discussion of trading volume on Arbitrum, LPing on Arbitrum. There's going to be huge opportunities there. We're not talking about some of the grants, the token incentives on Arbitrum. I'm talking about pure, buyers and sellers here, because there's many knock-on effects in the ecosystem that we'll also talk about today. But in terms of pure sellers, it does look like we've seen the majority. The question, I guess, right now is how many of those token claimers actually did choose to sell? And you can't really slap an exact prediction on it. I'd say like 30 to 50%, maybe half, I think is a fair estimate. But, a lot of people are going to hold, especially because the Arbitrum token dropped so significantly and people weren't able to get out in time. Like, for example, myself, right? It was late at night. I was also trying to sleep. The claiming didn't happen till Arbitrum was like $1.40, $1.50. So I was kind of like, look, what's the point of selling here? I'm probably a buyer around $1.50. Maybe not that high, but I'm roughly a buyer around the dollar range long term anyway. So why don't I just hold my airdrop and just add it to my long-term positions? Like, I don't really mind doing that. I don't really need the liquidity right now. So I decided to hold. I think that sentiment will probably prevail amongst a lot of airdrop recipients, especially the guys that didn't receive like that much capital in relation to the rest of their portfolio, where it's not life-changing money. Then, a lot of them might choose to hold. And I'm in the category where, it's not life-changing money. I don't need the liquidity. So I may as well just hold and see how it performs. But I am looking at adding to my position. I am looking at trading this. And I think there's going to be opportunities to trade this as well. So right now, I have most of my focus going to, okay, how do I get opportunities in the ecosystem through LPing? Because fees during the first few days are really, really high. And incentives are also high for ecosystem dApps. And then how can I also trade the token itself to get maximal results? Or, I know it's a bit of a risky game trading a new token, but how can I at least, try or attempt to do it? Because we've seen, for example, like the 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗏 airdrop that created many opportunities to get some good entries if you could nail them. So the lack of volatility, I guess, is a bit annoying on the Arbitrum token. It seems to have settled pretty quick. That's likely due to the volume, though. When you have a token doing this much volume, when you have a token doing, a token worth $14 billion, it's much harder to move that market. So a little bit different from some of the other airdrops with lower valuations, probably more similar to Aptos than 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗏. Although Aptos was quite volatile, but that's also because there was a massive short squeeze. If you guys remember, the narrative around Aptos was a lot more negative than Arbitrum. Aptos didn't really have a community. Aptos was very VC driven. So a lot of crypto Twitter and market participants, they didn't like that. Whereas Arbitrum is generally pretty well liked. So you don't have, I guess, the abrasive short pressure, at least not, public short pressure and sentiment that we had on the Aptos token launch. So I just think generally, like, more people are thinking, oh, how do I get exposure to Arbitrum because I missed it, rather than how do I short this thing to death? Whereas if you guys remember Aptos, everyone was thinking, how do I short this thing to death? It's gone to zero. Like, everyone was just perplexed how it was so highly valued. And that resulted in that pretty volatile, massive upwards price expansion, because you had a lot of people getting squeezed out of positions. So before we get the guest on stage to talk about the market and talk a little bit more about Arbitrum, I want to remind you that we just kicked off an exclusive Crypto Banter giveaway with OKX. So this is pretty massive. If you guys missed yesterday's show where I announced this giveaway, we actually are giving away a Tesla to lucky winners that trade on OKX. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be conducting a trading competition. In just 3 days' time, we're giving away an iPhone 14. On April 3rd, so a week later, we're giving away a MacBook Pro. 2 weeks after that, we're giving away 2 tickets to see Manchester City live. Then a week after that, or 2 weeks after that, we are giving away a 7 nights holiday to the Maldives. And then finally, on the 22nd of May, after all the initial prizes have been given out, there's the big giveaway, which is obviously the Tesla Model 3, which is roughly a $43,000 car. Depending on what country you're in with taxes, it could be even more. Like in Australia, for example, it's closer to 60 to 70,000. So these are the prizes up for grabs. It's, I think, the biggest giveaway we've ever done on Crypto Banter with a trading exchange. I think it's the biggest giveaway off the top of my head since the Banter bags way back in the bull run. So it's pretty massive. How you get involved? You can use the link in the description and sign up for an OKX account if you don't have one. If you trade $10,000 worth of cumulative trade volume, you will get 5 raffle tickets. That's not saying you need to deposit $10,000. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. It just means get up to that volume. So you could trade with $100 100 times, or $100 and 10x leverage 10 times. There's many ways to get up to 10,000. I'm not suggesting you take unnecessary risk. Of course, be very aware and diligent when you're trading using leverage. I don't suggest anyone just farms this for the sake of it. But if you were going to trade anyway, then you can do so on OKX and expose yourself to the potential upside of the giveaway we have going. So link in the description. Remember to be safe when you trade. Don't take unnecessary risk. And yeah, if you want to trade, it's there. So let's get into the big questions now. And I have a special guest, Tnut, joining us to help give some clarity over the market and talk about his personal trading plan as well. So Tnut, welcome to the stream.
Yeah, thanks, man. Cheers for having me on.
So I guess we have to talk about Arbitrum first because I've just talked about it. I was going to ask you like a more general question about Bitcoin ETH, but I think the audience now just wants to know about Arbitrum. So yeah, how are you viewing the Arbitrum price action so far? Do you have like a plan to trade it, or are you, what's your plan with Arbitrum?
Yeah, so I guess we can start with, I got quite lucky. I was in like the first 2% of 𝗟𝗍𝗃, I think, today. And that was manual as well. So like I'm far too stupid to be making my own bots. So I kind of got lucky, and I'm kind of share a couple of things about that a little bit later about how to kind of like write contracts and things like that to be able to claim and pre-approve kind of contracts before we claim a token, especially when like a network is congested. But I kind of generally had like a similar level to you. So I think especially watching the OTC market over the last kind of few weeks, it seemed to be there was a lot of trades going in at around $1 to $1.20. So for me, that was kind of a level I was watching. And I did actually do some TA on it this morning on like the 1 minute chart. And I managed to, so I held all my airdrop pretty much. I think I sold somewhere like 1.7. And basically, yeah, I started buying around 1.1. And I think kind of like similar to what you were mentioning, I was looking mainly, if I come off of that view, these charts don't make it easy when they have the wicks.
It's crazy.
But yeah, I was kind of looking at similar price action on Optimism and on Blur, which recently was something I traded as well. So basically, I just looked very quickly for some sign of a bottom here, which we got at around 1.1. We got a few wicks down into it. And more importantly, there's also quite a lot of LP ranges from $1 to $1.50. So on chain, a lot of people were trying to LP the like high APR on Arbitrum, because as I think you mentioned, the volume's kind of through the roof, right, when these tokens start trading. So you can capture a lot of yield. And a lot of people set bots to kind of range trade these things. So basically, that means that there's going to be a lot of buying pressure coming in at the bottom of these ranges. So as soon as I saw like $1.10 holding, I started buying, and I literally, it's quite embarrassing. I think I set these lines on like the 5 minute chart, like here. So they might be a bit off now. But I kind of then had one around 150 at like a psychological level.
I'm surprised that structure's held though. Since like I know they're rough lines, but generally it's obeyed market
yeah,
structure.
I think that's the thing is like it's pretty easy to set these things and kind of trade off of them. They don't need to be exact, in my opinion, on this. It kind of just gives you, more than anything, it gives me like invalidation areas for a trade, which is probably the main thing I look for, especially on a trade like this where the downside risk, like let's say you buy at $1.10 and it just keeps going down, like where are you cutting the trade? Where's your like invalidation? You're just going to hold it to zero. So I try to like set ranges as quickly as possible on charts, just so it gives me something to trade against. But I think a really useful thing, because as you mentioned, the volatility's today not been too great. And I don't think too many people are going to be interested in trading the 5 minute chart. So I think more broadly, what you want to look for is these tokens have typically like, they've gone up probably in the first day or two, and they've set like a high, and then we've seen like a sell-off. And I think you see like people who have been buying the last 2 days start kind of closing out their positions as like price comes back down. And we then tend to enter in like a long period of accumulation. So if it follows, for example, Optimism. See, did I draw this on the chart? Yes, I did. So
I did an outlay as well myself a few days ago. I kind of charted Optimism, Aptos, and Blur. So we have seen a very similar pattern from all these.
Yeah, there we go. So you got it much better than me. I think, yeah, so we got this on like Optimism. We got this initial push up in the first couple of days. You can see on the far left. I don't know if we're going to do quite something this dramatic. I kind of hope not. But if we do, I'll kind of be looking for this. As you say, I think we then tend to get like volatile moves. And then kind of like the real long-term positioning for me is when you start to see this kind of price action, which is steady selling off. And then you start to see higher lows start to be formed. And for me, what we've had here is, I would say, you've had a deviation below a range. We've then come back. We've retested it here twice, formed a really nice like double bottom here. So this is where I'd first buy on Optimism. And then you just try and build a position here. Obviously, we have no idea if Arbitrum is going to follow the same kind of plan as this. But broadly, that's how I tend to trade airdrops. So I traded Blur recently, looking for the same thing. Blur, I held my airdrop.
You would have got some nice shorts there.
Yeah, I actually bought, I think, 60 cents. I then managed to sell some at 1.2, just a couple of wicks there. I bought back at 85 on leverage. I didn't sell the top, I'll be honest. I was hoping for like $2. But once we broke back down through this kind of previous level here, I kind of cut the trades. I think I gave it one more go at $1. And when we broke, I just sold again. But overall, I made like a 2 to 3x on my buys for Blur. And as you can see, we kind of, as I just showed on like Optimism, we kind of then had that sell off. And now what I'm hoping for is to see, we've had a constructive like bottom here, a sharp push up, and then we're looking for higher lows. Whether this plays out the same as Optimism in terms of like that is the ultimate bottom, who knows? But they're similar kind of structures. And as far as airdrops go, like these are like the way I try to play them. So short term,
Blur, what would you need to see on the chart? What level is like a key level for Blur to reclaim?
So I think like for me, I would be pretty content. I'm not actually in this, I have to admit. I only really looked at this chart again, having sold it. Once I saw kind of the Arbitrum drop, I was like, right, time to revisit some of these charts and see what we look like. But broadly, if you consider this to be like a potential deviation bottom, and as you can see, we've had like a wick below, quickly bought up, I would tend to be looking at something like this and going, right, so this is this area is a buy. Obviously, we've now kind of gone past that. But for me, I would be going, right, something like this, very arbitrarily, look to buy a trend line here. Yep. Any sort of buys, I would probably cut on a clean break back below 55 cents, because we've seen that was a clear buy zone. When we revisited it before, it got quickly bought back up. So, yeah, I think if I can draw it on real quick, if we did something like this, we broke down here and then retested and rejected, this is probably where I'd look to sell if I was buying. And I would basically be looking to accumulate anywhere above about 50 cents. And for me, this kind of 75 cents level would probably be the first major resistance we're looking at. So yeah, I think broadly this can probably chop for a while, depending on what the market does. But yeah, I think this kind of price action would be something like that would be really nice to look for. Maybe you sell a bit there if you've been buying, and if we reclaim, then you can buy back.
It makes sense, because if you look at, now I'm not saying this will happen. In fact, I don't think this will happen. But if you do look at Optimism and Aptos as precedent, Optimism after it's in its third move, so like we're kind of distinguishing these as like three phases, right? The first phase is this pump, second phase is the sell-off, third phase is, once sellers are exhausted, then price pumps. We had that play out on Optimism, then we had it on Aptos. We've seen signs of it playing out on Blur, but it never got that final push up. Obviously, market conditions, general altcoin weakness, etc. There's many reasons why. but I still think there is some sort of move up from Blur yet to come. Like a lot of the sellers are now out, and I'm not too well versed in the tokenomics, so I can't touch on the fundamentals, but just purely based on pair, at some point I think we're going to see a move to the upside. It's just about nailing
Yeah, I mean, if I was like looking at Blur right now, I would be looking to buy, not to like sell or short personally. But again, I think the important thing is it has downtrended. If like I think like the caveat of pretty much all this stuff, right, is like Bitcoin's at major resistance. If we see a rejection, alts are going to bleed. So you kind of have to have that context in your mind with most of the stuff you're trading. But yeah, broadly, as you say, like we have this like high volatility period, the market sells off, and then you typically see some sort of accumulation because you're seeing lots of buyers and sellers kind of trading hands at certain levels. And once
so going back to Arbitrum, just quickly, do you see are you waiting for like seller exhaustion, like this multiple week sell off to like start to get entries, or do you think maybe the bottom could form quicker on ARB than what it did on Aptos and Optimism?
Yeah, so again, I think like it's going to be slightly dependent on like market conditions in terms of like the confidence and people buying. At the end of the day, you got to realize like if people have been airdropped a ton of free money, kind of so to speak, and the market starts dumping, you're going to see a lot of profit taking. But the way I kind of view it is like short term, considering I'm like quite bullish on Arbitrum as like a fundamental project, like it's a big deal in the space. We've seen a ton of volume and kind of like value locked into kind of the ecosystem. I kind of look at it.
I think you just cut off. Don't know if it's internet related. Can you guys hear him? If not, it may be me. But I think it is Tnut. Pal, let me know. Okay, you guys can't hear him. I'll just remove him for a second, and then I'll add you back, Tnut, when your internet starts working again. You guys can't. All right, we'll add him back in a sec. He's gone. We'll add him back in a sec. What we're seeing right now is a slight push up from the Arbitrum price from $1.30 back to the 134 range. So we have seen like quite a bit of buy pressure or demand in this area. Once again, I think that $1.20 region for me is still like a standout region. I'm just going to wait for him to re-add. He's just leaving the StreamYard. Then he's coming back in. You back now? You good?
Yeah, all good. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Probably just internet. It happens. So yeah, what were you saying about you talked about your Arbitrum plans?
Yeah, so the way I tend to trade these airdrops, as we kind of mentioned, like I look for a short-term bottom. I usually hold the airdrops. I'm not like a huge fan of dumping an airdrop when it launches. Like I think if it's a significant amount of money to you, whether that's because it's a huge amount of money or maybe you kind of like you're new to crypto and we know these airdrops, if you've got like a 4-figure portfolio, these things can like double, triple your portfolio. I think that's a different case. Like in that, usually I'd at least sell some of it if that was you. But for me, these kind of things they're like, I just see it as like a bonus. So I usually hold the airdrop regardless. I then try to buy initial sell-offs and then I'll try to sell a local high. I've not sold any yet. So I may look like an idiot if we start dumping from here. But yeah, I'd be hopefully looking for another push up towards 1.5 to 1.8 would probably be reasonable for me short term. If we start going crazy above that, that's fine. But I usually kind of add some low leverage in when I can on kind of pullbacks. And basically the idea is kind of like offload that at the top or close to it and probably offload maybe like 25% of the airdrop as well, with the idea being hopefully you've played the initial kind of like push up, you have capital left to buy if we come back down into accumulation. And for me, if it keeps going up, at least I've still got some exposure for my airdrop. Like I'm not, unless I'm kind of like specifically trading setups, I don't like particularly being like all in or all out of a position. Like Arbitrum is saying I'm bullish on long term. I'm not going to risk selling the entirety of my position because I think I can capture an extra 10% because I'm a genius. Like that's just not the way I kind of approach it. So yeah, I think like for me, I'll be trading it short term. And then if it starts selling off, I'll just be patient and kind of wait for that kind of, hopefully that similar price action that we saw on kind of like Blur and Optimism. If it keeps going up, yeah, sorry.
That would suggest we probably have like a multiple week sell off. I don't know if it'll be as long as the others because I think the market, it actually seems like the market pricing at this stage has been more advanced than Optimism and Aptos in the sense that like it hit what we would assume to be fair value quicker. Whereas like when Optimism launched, I don't think anyone thought $2 was fair value. When Aptos launched, I don't think anyone thought $10 was fair value. And when Blur launched, I don't think anyone thought $1.50 was, like, they all launched higher. Whereas like I think the difference for me right now is most predictions pre-airdrop were like $1 to $1.20. Arbitrum were already almost there. So do you think maybe do you think maybe we hit the lows like quicker? That's kind of what I'm thinking than some of these other airdrops.
Yeah, it could be. I think the thing for me would be like, if this airdrop price action is like, if we get there quicker, I would suggest maybe the airdrop price action plays out faster. And then once that's done, if the market starts, like if Bitcoin starts coming back down to 20K, then Arbitrum's going to dump off like everything else. So yeah, again, like I think you could be right. And what I'd tend to look for is like these patterns is not so much about kind of the length of time. For me, it's more the pattern. So if that happens on a 4-hour chart or a 1-week chart, that's fine as far as I'm concerned. And I think as long as you're executing your trade on the same time frame, so like if you're trading on a 1-hour chart, you're probably looking to be in that trade for like 24 to 72 hours, maybe at most. If you're looking for like multi-week accumulation, you're going to have to be a bit more patient with it. So those are all things like I think you just need to understand why you're entering your trade and for what like period of time. So like if we saw like the next couple of days, that kind of price action where it goes back down towards like $1 or $1.20, and then it pushes back up again towards like $2 after an accumulation, I'd probably be selling there again because that would be the type of accumulation and push up I was looking for. I might have to buy back some higher. I might have to, I don't know, miss it a little bit. But yeah, I kind of like take the trades on the trade idea on the time frame that I'm watching, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it does make sense. I was just pointing out to the audience as well, Arbitrum is now flipped-matic for FDV. So it's 39 in terms of market cap, but that's obviously only because 12% of the supply is live. It is, I think, I was just doing some quick checks. I think it's top 10 now for FDV. So it's a top 10 project. That's probably what we expect. Slightly higher than Optimism. I would say it's already a top 10 project.
Yeah, I think the thing as well with this as well is like, it's been so highly anticipated. It's quite difficult to know. So like people trading like the ecosystem coins, it's kind of like, I'm really 50-50 on like, are we going to see these all send immediately, or do they consolidate a while and then go back up, or kind of have they topped already? Because everyone knew Arbitrum was coming. Everyone's been hyping these projects for months. Sometimes you have to question like who's left to buy. And that's kind of like a question I often ask myself, like when you're trying to trade like events, especially, or like narratives, is like
they've all dropped. They've all had a sell-off. Buy the rumor, sell the news.
Yeah, so it's kind of like who's still left to buy? Who's going, the Arbitrum airdrop, let's buy the next ecosystem coin. Again, it could maybe last a couple of days and then they could go back up because Arbitrum's great. Who knows? But
it's about the impact of the token incentives. Like it's about the individual. I think in general, the like entire ecosystem pumping just for the sake of it. I'm not sure that trade is like the best trade anymore. I think the best trade is trying to identify the individual like protocol beneficiaries and looking for the ones that are like using their incentives in like very smart ways to attract liquidity. Because every project has different amounts of incentives. So the ones that like use it well in order to incentivize LPers and drive trading volume, and we're yet to like see how every protocol actually utilizes their ARB. I think those ones will be the ones that perform the best. So it's kind of hard to put a general blanket on the whole ecosystem now that like the lazy trade I think's up, and the lazy trade is look, it's quick to come to conclusions because we don't know, they could all pump, but I think the lazy trade of just like buying everything under the sun that is attached to Arbitrum is kind of like you are fairly late on that, so you can probably punt on maybe it recovering, but it's like not like a guaranteed bet. I think your much better bet is looking at, yeah, as I said, like the individual beneficiaries. And we don't quite know yet, like that we might need a few days for some of these to settle and some of the data to start to come in. Because, for example, Gains Network, like you could say once they list Arbitrum, their volume is going to spike. But I'm not looking for a 1-day volume spike. I'm looking for like a 3 to 5 day consistent volume increase. So like I know, okay, this is actually impacting trading volume. Or Magic, I want to see that their DAO, that their ARB allocation is actually affecting yields for stakers, you know? So you kind of sometimes need to let these things settle a little bit. That's kind of where my head's at. I don't know if you share
100%. I think what you said about the lazy traders gave me a laugh because I think that's pretty much what I trade. Like I trade the lazy trades. I love them. But I think you're right.
Lazy's good if you're early.
Yeah,
lazy's really
exactly. I think if you're doing like fundamental trades for some of these alts, you're just gonna have to be patient because some of this stuff, as you say, like you're not only not going to see the decision making overnight, but these things take time to kind of like find their real valuation for other people to get into them. And yeah, we're going to have short-term volatility around obviously everything to do with Arbitrum. So like the lazy trade for me was I actually bought, I won't mention the specific coins because they're quite low cap, but I bought quite a few ZK ecosystem coins a couple of days ago, basically on the thesis that as soon as Arbitrum dropped, people's attention would go, right, so what's next? And ZK is like the next thing that's hyped. People would want to know how to get exposure or how to get those assets. And a bunch of those have pumped like 50% the last couple of days. So that's like a really lazy trade. And that's kind of like the type of way that I try to approach the market is something that I call like second order effects.
Wow, mute. I wonder if this was one. This is one on my list.
Yeah,
that's up 27.
Yeah, I bought mute about 50 cents, I think. So I'm quite happy with that one.
Oh wow, we are seeing a rotation. This is clear. And I've been talking about this for quite a while.
You can see zigzags trending on there as well, which is the exchange token for
so 24-hour pumps. Literally all of them are ZK. Look at this. Well, not necessarily Mars, but Loopring, Mina. If you just scroll down, like most, and this is only top 100. If you look at individual protocols.
So I think it's going to be the stuff specifically on like the ZK ecosystem, which, as you mentioned, like Mute is one of the big DeFi hubs building on there directly.
We're also seeing Shanghai as well. That's probably the other narrative that's kind of subsided, but it's still kind of there. We've seen like Rocket Pool. I wonder if Lido performed.
Yeah, I think we also see things like Rocket Pool. Quite a few protocols today announced. Well, they all posted like the 24th of the 3rd like GIF on Twitter, which I think is basically because the ZK era like mainnet goes live tomorrow, I believe. If I'm wrong on that, don't kill me. But I think there's a lot of projects that are basically announcing that they're moving onto ZK or expanding, onto ZK tomorrow. So I think there's a few of those that have kind of got bid up as well. But yeah, I think perhaps that's something, if we've got the time, I can touch on a little bit around like second order kind of ideas and kind of how I approach identifying what I think might move well in the market.
100%. Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions for you. So obviously you've picked some of the top performers on your Twitter. And I think generally you've been pretty spot on like that with your tweets. Like they kept coming up on my feed even before I was following you, and I was like, fuck, this guy keeps making profits. I don't know if it was just the Twitter algorithm or what, but it kind of made me wonder, how do you identify, what is your strategy for identifying coins with strengths? I've even seen you make these little watch lists with like things you think might.
If we can share my screen quickly, I can show you like a really quick couple of ways that I do that. So if you look on the right hand side here, this is an example one I've made. But basically, I tend to split things into like little groupings of what I would consider like narratives. That term's massively overused now, like everyone's going on about it, right? But that's the word, we'll use it. So like you have like AI, the LSD tokens, like some zero proof stuff here, and then the Bitcoin DeFi. So these are all narratives that I've traded this year. I got pretty fortunate with them. So like AGIX is a perfect example. Unfortunately, it's one I actually didn't buy, but I identified this about 5 cents or so, maybe a bit less. I think it went about 15x since the turn of the year. Similar with Fetch. So I bought Fetch at about 9 cents here. I will get back onto the point of this rather than just looking at charts and going, look when I called it, because that's not particularly helpful. And then we saw a similar thing with like CFX, which is obviously being another kind of like top performer. And the thing that I tend to look for is like, everyone knew that AI, like we had that chat GPT 4 like come out or whatever, or 3 in like December, right? And we saw everyone talked about it. We got this big initial pump, and then price started kind of like consolidating here. And for me, it was kind of like, there's a potential narrative that I looked at and I went, AI coins, right? And there's a few different things I look for. So I mentioned earlier, the first thing I like is like a clear invalidation for my ideas on the charts. So if I'm investing based on like a narrative or a fundamental, I still want to find a price on the chart where I'll believe I'll be wrong. So for me, this was like, once it reclaimed here, it was like consistent day closes below kind of the 9 cent level. We didn't get that, so I just started buying in around here. And there's kind of like a few different things. So it's kind of like viewing what a narrative would be basically a series of like events that connect and tell a story basically of like an idea, and people either lap it up or they don't. And your job, if you're trading them, is to basically judge if you think the market's priced this new information efficiently or not. So is price currently reflecting the information we now have in the market? So for me, AI getting all over the news and everything like that, but price kind of trading here, I was waging no. We also had the FTX sell-off and everything. So as far as I was concerned, I was like, this has been incredibly bearish. In a broader context, I'm looking to buy. And there weren't many narratives at the start of the year. So I figured like whatever was there, people would latch onto.
Yeah.
But what I noticed very quickly is everyone was fading this. I don't know if you were like, remember AI in like December, January, everyone's like, it's already pumped, it's already moved.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of like the price inefficiency is like we spoke about earlier, like who's left to buy. Like if I'm buying something, I want to be early. That means I want to be before other people. So if your whole timeline is telling you that it's like either going to go up, but price is showing you the opposite, or that it's already played out. But as far as I was concerned, I was like, well, price is actually holding this level really nicely. And I think if we bring up like some EMAs, we were starting to like reclaim these. And at the time, no other altcoins were doing this. But like daily levels were being reclaimed on moving averages. And I was like, as far as I was concerned, I was like, price is showing me the complete opposite of what sentiment is. So yeah, I started buying, and obviously the point mainly of trading altcoins is you're looking to outperform the market, right? Outperform Bitcoin. So I actually went like all in on low margin on AI coins in December. So that was like all in on my like main trading accounts, not like I didn't sell like all my real world assets. I didn't like
sell the watch, sell the house.
Exactly. But no, that kind of like that was at my highest conviction trade probably in about a year.
Wow. Well done.
And I think the thing that most people then wonder is like, once this starts moving, is like, how do you manage this? And how do you like identify when to get out and what else will pump and all those kind of things? Because that's what people look for. Like you see FET moving or Fetch, whatever it is, and everyone goes, right, well, what's next? What else can I get into? And also, has this topped? So broadly, what I would what I would do is I make these groupings and I basically treat, so these ones marked with a red tick are what I consider the market leaders. So they're what's led the move. They're often the biggest market cap. They often have the best liquidity. So like big players can get in. And they're generally the ones that have the strongest potential fundamentals or connection to any sort of narrative. So we see this. You had like Stacks recently. So this is one, again, got in around here after, you know, all these stuff with ordinals. So, you know, that all picked up. Yeah, I kind of looked. Yeah, I looked.
It was like 160,000 digital artifacts in like the first week we created. It was like a gold rush, basically. It was crazy.
Yeah. So as soon as that kind of happened, I'm not really like an NFT guy. So I thought like, where is the most liquid place people can speculate on like Bitcoin NFTs / Bitcoin DeFi? At that point, you have to start doing a bit of research. You have to dig in. I found Stacks, and it was the biggest market cap. It was the one kind of leading DeFi and wallet initiatives on Bitcoin, like as a layer 2. So I kind of like started bidding in here, and obviously it took a little while, but price caught up with the idea. And I guess that's similar with AI. Before I kind of go on to the next bit, is a lot of people might immediately say these AI tokens are trash, and I would probably agree that some of them are. Like some of them have like added AI to their website in the last 3 months or whatever.
Updated their roadmap.
Yeah. So I think like if you're trading long term, obviously like the fundamentals are really important to what you're holding and like who's building, how it's backed and things like that. But kind of short term, like my thesis is often like people just want exposure and liquidity to these ideas. So in the case of AI stocks are kind of like big tech stocks. There's a lot of overlap. It's quite indirect. Crypto offered really easy access, especially for retail, to be able to speculate on the idea of AI as a whole. Like AI as a technology. Where's somewhere I can speculate on the future price of this? And here you have some liquid tokens that you can easily leverage on, you can easily buy. They move a lot. And even if we just think people are gambling, the market basically reprices them as a result.
It's a story. It's a narrative.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing I look for with Stacks is ordinals are a massive pain to get into. They're pretty liquid. There's a lot of copycats. The wallet infrastructure
is so hard to get into. You need to like do like OCCs in Discords, and like the average person like doesn't know how to do that or wants to take on that kind of risk, right?
I also think things like VCs are quite lazy in a lot of this stuff sometimes. So you saw quite a few VCs talking about Stacks at around about 60, 70 cents, which was great for me because it was kind of like, yeah, please keep pushing this up for a little while. I'll enjoy that. But you kind of think like they want quick liquid exposure to these kind of ideas. So again, Stacks was like an obvious example. And then in terms of like trading that, I'll try to play the main market leader because it tends to move the most. People fade it early. People go, well, what's next? And then you often see
already around what's next. Yeah,
it's already what's next, but actually the market leader often continues to show strength. So I'll usually stick in that, but then you start to look at things that are maybe further out on the risk curve in terms of their smaller market cap. People are looking for where they can throw their money. And you kind of see like we had like Ocean, RLC, CTXC as examples. They tend to move a bit later as well because they're reactionary. So you might have a bit more time to get into the move. And the way that I then manage it is I kind of treat it like a strong trending market. So like moving averages and things like that. I'm kind of like quite an aggressive buyer. So I'll market in a lot. I'll buy moving average retests. And I'll kind of just try to compound and milk the move as much as I can. And in terms of my overall like risk exposure, I basically keep a really keen eye on the market leader. When that makes like a final push up and you start to see it distribute or show weakness, typically that's when I want to cut all my exposure in the other risky plays. And where a lot of people lose money is they're not watching the main mover. Kind of reminds me of Bitcoin, you know? It's like you need to watch Bitcoin and watch if it's distributing at highs. When it starts distributing, often alts are running crazy, but at some point the music stops. And when it starts reversing or like the liquidity gets pulled from it, the other ones are much more volatile to the downside because a lot fewer people are holding them. People are holding them for less strong reasons. There's less buying support. So I tend to, you can see like RLC is one got nuked off. It's back up now, but yeah, that's typically how I manage them. I try to play as long as possible. When I start to see this kind of price action, I'd want to be exiting like fully. And I'll do the same thing on kind of the alternative altcoins as well. Because I think otherwise you end up with a bunch of people who end up bag holding, right? Like you might have caught the move halfway up. You have a massive unrealized profit, and then you carry it all the way back down to break even, and you're wondering whether you should sell or keep holding. And I hate being in that position. Like I really just dislike it. So I'm like all about like just trying to identify where the structure looks broken, and yeah, just immediately exiting on that basically.
So what narratives are you kind of looking at now? What's got your interests?
So it's been a bit harder recently because I think you kind of touched on it, right? Like we've got Bitcoin as this really heavy potential resistance. So I think I've got marked on here. These are yearly opens for Bitcoin. There are actually 2 consecutive yearly opens in 2020 and 2021. We've also got a bunch of wicks here and previous support. And these are also, I think, quarterly lows. So we've got like Bitcoin bashing up against that here. So as far as I'm concerned, like I've been I actually risked off at 25K because it was just a range high move for me. And I then got pretty lucky. I bought like 19.8 on leverage and got a bit degenerate on the weekend with no sleep. And I managed to carry that to like 26K. But with Bitcoin around here, I think we've seen Bitcoin's had a strong bid, but you've also seen obviously the macro uncertainty and being at like high level resistance. I think you're seeing altcoins are probably demonstrating that uncertainty a little bit stronger, right? Like they've all kind of bled off against Bitcoin quite heavily. So I think that's kind of showing to me, even if Bitcoin's showing continued strength, probably a bit more of the risk taking in the market is become a bit more concentrated. So those like early lazy traders I was speaking about, I think they've dried up a little bit. If Bitcoin either breaks through or we see kind of Bitcoin dominance fall and we see Altcoin, I mean, we know how it goes. Like, does price follow narrative or does narrative follow price, right? Like, we'll all come up with anything once price starts going up. So it's generally, I'm a little more cautious at the moment. One thing that I've been pretty
Would you short this level? Sorry to cut you off, but I was just wondering, like, since we are approaching resistance, like, are you actively looking at shorting like altcoins at this level?
So I am actually in a small short on Bitcoin at the moment, from like the mid 28s. It's kind of mainly like a hedge. So at the moment, that would be my preference. I'm basically hedging quite a lot at the moment. So my altcoin exposure. So one thing I'm in is this, which is I think 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏 network.
Crypto
which has shown a ton of strength. This is kind of the old China narrative, whatever that means. And yeah, that's kind of like, for me, that I'd reclaim this level here. I was in from a bit below on some strength, but for me, as long as it holds like this on a daily level, I really like it. So I'm kind of like long on this, and I've been short on 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 and I think Optimism as well, which have just shown a little more weakness for me at resistance. So when I'm a little less certain and I'm still
pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. And when I'm like still playing a couple of altcoins, I'll tend to look to pair it up where I can, just to kind of hedge that out, especially whilst I'm uncertain. Like if we start picking a direction strongly, I'll maybe like close out some of the hedges. But for now, that's mainly how I'm positioned, and that's something.
So what do you need to see? What do you need to see for altcoins to like start to gain some momentum? Because I pointed out as well earlier, ETH BTC still looks pretty shit. Many alt BTC pairs look bad. What do you need to see to like get back heavier into alts?
Yeah, you've got a very similar chart to me on ETH BTC. I posted about it a couple of days ago. Basically looking for a really similar bit of price action here, and I'm looking for that like 6.4 level, ideally 6.6 to be reclaimed for some strength on ETH. We obviously saw a big bounce, and then similarly you've got the Bitcoin dominance. I think was around like it hit resistance at about 48%. So if we start to see like a pullback on that, as well as ETH gaining some strength, I would start to be more interested in altcoins more broadly. At the moment, I'm being a little more selective in what I'm looking for. But yeah, exactly. You've got the same kind of level on your dominance chart. Like if we start breaking above that, I'm kind of abandon ships on alts for a little while. But yeah, for now, if we treat it like, I mean, we don't have to say like this is going to come down to 38%, right? It can give us a couple of percent, and that can give us a week to play with some alts. So
for sure, absolutely. Like one week in altcoin land could be a year.
Exactly, man. Exactly. And I think that kind of actually lines up if we were to pull back, would be Bitcoin distributing around here for a pullback, altcoin dominance picking up a little bit, and then we could see a pullback. If we go to like a Bitcoin chart, I'm kind of like, the way I describe where I've been for like the last 3 months has kind of been like cautiously bullish the entire way. So I like risked off, as I said, at 25k, but I was still very interested to buy dips. And I think we're now approaching a key level where if you've bought lower and you've maybe trimmed some profits, I think there's nothing wrong with going like, I want to see if this plays out to the upside, right? But if you're looking to position here, I think you need to be like very careful in knowing where you'd be wrong, because it's very easy. Like as we all know, like you don't particularly want to buy resistance. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of like mainly out of the market, I would say, at the moment. And the stuff I'm in is very isolated trends where I can cut the trades quite easily if I'm wrong.
So let's say Bitcoin does break and I think it's going to take quite the push, quite the, I don't know, news or something massive to really get a break. But if it does, let's just say hypothetically, what alts do you think will be the strongest? Do you think some of those narratives like the AI and some of the China stuff, like, do you think that still has the strength?
I personally, for now, I think the things that have been strongest will like continue to show strength largely. I think the ZK stuff could get some interest in the short term. I think ETH, if we actually get like more focus on what happens with like the Shanghai upgrade and things like that, we could see a push up into that. But like broadly, my trading approach is like, I'm not too predictive. I don't find there's that much value in it. So like if someone follows me, they'll see that I do a lot of scenario planning, which is like, if price does this, then I'll do this. And that applies to altcoin charts as well. And I would say like what I'm like good at is digesting information quickly, reacting to it, and then what we spoke about, like second order effects of going, well, what does this then mean? So for me at the moment, like in trying to like predict what will be strong next, I have like a couple of ideas, but I don't think there'll be anything different, particularly to what most people are talking about. I'm not like, I don't think I'm smarter than anyone else in this market, but broadly,
it's always good to be humble. That's, I think people recognize and they think they're smarter, right?
You can tell I've taken a lot of losses in my time.
But they make you stronger.
But yeah, broadly, I like the Chinese idea and like the Hong Kong stuff going into, I think Hong Kong, that like idea of them legalizing crypto, whether that's
especially with the SEC clamping down on like the US.
Exactly.
Like we're seeing a rapid pace now. SushiSwap, Coinbase, like it is a war on crypto, and what it's inevitably, unfortunately, going to do, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your outlook, is drive capital, talent, probably out of the US, but likely into countries like the UAE and also the East that are now starting to maybe realize, well, if the US is going to like do a shit job at managing this tech, then maybe we can do a better job and take advantage of it. So I think, Hong Kong, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 co-founder of Tangent Ventures with Jason Choi on the show last week, and he said he thinks we're about to he's looking very heavily at investing from a VC side of things in upcoming like small Asian startups, because he thinks like some of the biggest crypto projects are actually going to come out of Asia, even though we haven't seen it yet. He said he's seeing like a bit of a trend starting to form, and they're heavily looking at backing those teams because he thinks there's going to be a shift.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. So like CFX, for example, is one that, again, it's not exactly a particularly helpful thing to shill after like a 10x. You're look, this coin's great, but like this is something I've personally, like I didn't buy the lows here. Like I definitely didn't. I wish
What are
I
you gonna
had.
say you did? Whew.
No. So I got in around like, so I posted on Twitter around about 5 cents. I was looking for a reclaim of this level. I have to admit, didn't quite think it would do this quickly. But yeah, so like I've got a bag of this staked and I'm kind of watching their ecosystem for developments and kind of like partnerships and things like that. And there's a few other projects that are kind of like partnering up with CFX. And yeah, as you say, like it's just looking for new things that are launching around there. So yeah, I like the idea of Asia as like an investment thesis. I think it fits kind of more broadly than crypto in a way as well for
It's
me
just
at least.
hard to pinpoint. I mean, there's basically such a lack of the only issue is there's such a lack of fundamentals because you don't necessarily know like what actually is Asian affiliated and what's just running because it's got China in the name. Like kind of like AI. It's a similar situation where you don't actually know whether this tech is really Asian at all or has anything to do with Asia, but it's called Asia, so it pumps.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like back to my points. What you kind of look for on these narratives, like once the narrative, like the speculative narrative is ran, which is like the market's trying to reprice it, and typically it overshoots it, right? Like typically we get people aping in, and the market overshoots the value. What you then want to look for is like, where does price then settle? So let's say if like I have no idea. I mean, I think a log chart. Am I on the log? Yeah, I am. If we look like the regular chart, like it shows like, let's say 30 cents or whatever, like either of these two bands, like if this is where it starts like accumulating, similar to what we spoke about with the airdrop tokens, right? If we start seeing, I have no idea if it will be this level or lower. Again, that's not really what bothers me. It's about seeing where the price action develops. If we start seeing something like that, you can start making a bet that, okay, we overshot there, but actually we're seeing money step in and buy here because they think the AI narrative will run again. And this is now considered maybe a more fundamentally fair price. So I think after you have the speculative run, you kind of, again, it's the exact same as the airdrop stuff. I play the initial run. I maybe take a lot of profit. Maybe I keep a spot bag. So I have like tiny spot bags of some of these from the lows because if it goes 100x from here, I don't want to be the idiot who sold everything. And basically, this is now the time where you start, as you say, like looking into which ones added it to the website this week and which ones have actually been building for a few years. You might look at who's backing it. So as you said, you had like Wangarian on, like are decent VCs in the project? Are they backing it? What's the development like? How do the team communicate? How frequently do they build? All that kind of stuff. That kind of takes a bit of time, but yeah, if you kind of start digging into that, I think that's when the fundamental analysis probably comes more into play. And again, I think you can be a bit more patient with that. So that's probably where you want to look to like maybe do your dollar cost averaging if that's how you approach the market.
I was just showing your Twitter in the background if you saw.
No,
so if anyone wants to follow Tnut, do it in the description. I think there's a link like at the top of the description. He also has a YouTube channel as well. So he hasn't posted in a month, but I think
I've been busy.
Doing it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you're too busy making money to bother about making videos. So no, but if you do want to follow him, link in the description. I highly recommend doing so. Clearly a very, very smart guy. And yeah, just thought I would mention that as well.
No, you're all good, man.
Pump your bags. Well, not your bags, but your follower bags.
Yeah. No, for sure. But yeah, I think that's kind of like where you start looking for more like the crypto fundamental value in these projects and kind of what they're building, what they're developing. And you'll probably see like the stuff that went up speculatively, it'll probably have no buy support on the way down. So again, price will probably give you a bit of indication as to some strength. There was something I thought I would mention that I do actually use, which I think is quite useful. You can kind of set it however you want. Oh, this is just a range chart. If we change this to line, this is something that I use reasonably regularly. Just like perhaps like on a new week for like 5 minutes is I change these to percent and hide this. So this is called like a spaghetti chart. And basically it allows you, whatever time frame you move to, it's a bit jolty there. Basically, you can see the performance of certain assets in percentage terms and how they're performing over whatever select time frame against other tokens. So you can see here, obviously, like since this time last year, CFX has outperformed everything. Bitcoin's down 30%. We'll go to a slightly lower time frame, so we don't have like the last year. But this is like a really easy way to track what's outperforming Bitcoin in the market. So for me, these are all the things I flagged as market leaders for each sector. I have like added to a chart here, and you can just start to look like which ones are trending up, which ones are trending down. And yeah, so for like narrative trading, I kind of use this to identify strength in the market. And on the flip side, when I think the market is ranging, I will use the same kind of thing to look for mean reversion. So if something's up really high and something else is down really low, and the individual charts look okay, you might look for them to correlate back to zero. So you might take again, if the market's in a range and you think something should come down, you can identify a pair that way. On the flip side, obviously, you can look to long something that's strong and short something that's weak. All of this is kind of context dependent, right? So I can't really sit here and go, here's one simple trick of how to use a spaghetti chart. Yeah. But I think it just provides a nice view for this.
Good visual.
Yeah,
it's like an easy visual. Yeah,
the way that you do it as well is once you've loaded up a chart, like a Bitcoin chart, you literally just add plus and you can just write in to compare a symbol. So if I write in ETH, you just add that in there and it'll just add it in. So yeah, it's really easy to add and you can just put whatever you want on there. Again, I don't think it's like a ground-breaking discovery, but it's something I kind of have in my back pocket just to like, if you like had a couple of days off the market, you're just coming back, it's like a really easy way to evaluate strength pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially because like if you're in crypto day to day, then obviously looking at Coinalyze for open interest and CoinGecko for 24-hour volume and performance is really good. Even Crypto Bubbles as well as like a good visualizer. But for people that you've been out of the market for like more than a couple of days, maybe you've taken the weekend off, and like the data on Bubbles and CoinGecko and stuff starts to get skewed, then doing it on your charts might give you just a better idea of what's happened, and then you can come to your own conclusion. Like it'll be pretty easy to come to a conclusion about where the strength is, Bitcoin versus alts, Bitcoin versus ETH, what narratives are pumping just by looking at it.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I think the one thing I'd touch on as well there, I guess, is I think there's a load of really useful information that people use. So as you say, like order flow, I think is, if I could pick anything that I don't use hugely in my trading, but I think is of massive value and you can definitely trade off of, it would be something like order flow. I think it is really useful.
Runner is the order flow guy.
Yeah. No, he's I followed him for a while. He's a really smart guy. And I think it's especially useful on like lower time frames as well. But what I found with my trading is I kind of went through a period of you try everything out, right? You're always looking for like that one little trick that's going to make you profitable. And I kind of have come back to like a really simplistic approach of, I have a couple of indicators on here, but they're only ever really used for like confirmation of what price is already showing me. So if like the candles and the support and resistance are showing me something, then I might use RSI as like confirmation, but I don't really use indicators a gigantic amount. And even stuff like funding rates, they can be useful, but again, I think they can sometimes be misleading. Like people can be hedging things. Sometimes spot price can be leading for a different reason. A lot of this, I would say that there's kind of like a bit of paralysis by analysis for people. And a lot of crypto, and this probably goes to like where you choose to focus your time, even beyond trading. So are you an NFT guy? Are you an airdrop farmer? Are you DeFi? A lot of people kind of, especially if they aren't full-time crypto, they probably spread themselves too thin. They look at too many factors because they want the next thing that's going to work for them. When actually you probably do best outperform the market by finding simple things that work for you and like repeating them consistently.
You're just trying to find your edge. Everyone's got a different...
Exactly. My edge is being like 10 IQ and just staring at candles all day. But yeah, I think that stuff's useful. But I found for me, and again, it varies person to person. I found for me, a lot of that stuff just confused my trade ideas. So I'd be like, well, the chart looks like this, but funding looks like this. When I reduced it back to what I was speaking about earlier, is like, well, where's my invalidation on the chart? And I'll just take the trade based off that. And that kind of simplified my process a lot. And yeah, stopped me spending hours stressing about these things.
I think it's really good advice, especially for like new traders. If you're newish to trading or you're not a trading expert, like probably most of you aren't that experienced with like trading for a long time. That's the best way to start. Just go PA trading first. Once you get a feel for like how price moves, how like narratives influence price influences narratives, however way you want to look at it. Once you get a bit better feel for how the market interacts, then you can start to branch out and look at things like order flow, etc. But I think starting basic is good, and you might find that the basic approach works for you really, really well, and then you never need to change anything because you make your money. The thing is in crypto, once you have an edge, there's a million ways to get an edge. Just run with that edge.
Exactly.
Like some people, airdrop farming's their edge. For some people like me, more fundamental based trading is my edge. For some people are day traders, they scalp, that's their edge. Find something that's good, that you're good at, is good for your temperament, because everyone's different. For example, I can't sit down and leverage trade all day because I get too emotional, so I'm better off on a slightly higher time frame and trading with slightly less, and everyone's different. Find what works for you. Your best edge might actually just be like one specific DeFi niche, like joining a Discord and becoming an expert in like gambling perp exchanges, or something really niche, or like gamified dexes. If you could become the expert in one field, you can create an edge that way as well. So there's a million ways, but starting small, starting basic, focusing on one thing will help you like eventually work out what it is if you haven't worked it out already.
Yeah, 100%, man. Like you only need one thing that you can repeat regularly to be profitable. Like you don't need to take a million setups. If you can find one setup that consistently works and you can be disciplined with it, you can make money.
Discipline's the hardest. The hardest, but the most important factor of everything.
Yeah, I would say like
comments.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I interrupted you there.
No, it's fine. You're very you're too nice. The streaming game's all about interrupting and spaces. If you've ever joined Twitter Spaces, I don't know. Do you do Spaces?
I hosted a few during like the crashes. I held a few like 4 or 5 hour therapy spaces mainly, and I've then done I've done some project ones where you like interview people, so it's a little more structured. But
well, the spaces are mayhem. Everyone talks over each other. Everyone argues. Everyone like it's it can be mayhem sometimes. So I'm used to it. But I was gonna say just like wrap up the show before we take up everyone's night/day. I know it's also late for you. Just maybe we circle back to Arbitrum, because that's I'm still seeing a bunch of comments. I assume from people that didn't watch the beginning of the show but have just like tuned in to the end and are wondering why isn't the title of the video being talked about. Do we want to kind of wrap up on Arbitrum and what the feel is for the new guys before we head off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, would you want to start on like repeat the Arbitrum token itself or the ecosystem, or?
I mean, we won't repeat too much what we went into, because I think people can just go back and watch. I guess kind of the question is just like, how about this for a final question? If you're a new person, you don't have exposure to Arbitrum, you like it, you want an entry, this is the main question I'm getting asked. Where and how would you work out what a good long-term entry would be? My answer to that before you give yours would be, I would just DCA in over time. I would, especially over the next 2 weeks, once you kind of start to see a bottom being formed, I would look to become a buyer, especially once some of the selling's been exhausted. That's kind of how I would play it, and then I would just buy at major support levels based on PA. I don't know if you share a similar view or if you're.
Yes, I think if you don't have any exposure right now and like you're desperate to get some, you kind of like, I think you need to like, for me again, and this is just my approach, is I don't mind buying something higher if the trade setup is a lot clearer. So like if we push up from here to like $3, I don't think we will immediately, but let's say we did, and then we formed a new bottom at 1.5, but it was really clear, I would consider that a better trade than buying up $1 if we just shot down and bounced straight back up suddenly. Just, it maybe not performance wise, but again, just in terms of like knowing where I'm wrong. So like, again, when I enter something, I always want to know like what's the maximum I'm willing to lose and where and kind of why. So right now, for me, looking at this current price, I kind of have this like, we have 1.2-ish and then 1.1, which was the low, right? I think if we revisit this, so let's say this was the top, just for argument's sake. If price was to do something like this in range, and then we had this, and we had a break below that low and a reclaim, I think this would be like an amazing entry, because like you've lost that low, you've reclaimed it. Equally, it could happen at the 1.2s, but basically, yeah, you want to be looking at these potential support areas. I won't call them major support because it seems a bit facetious on a 15-minute chart to call something major support. But yeah, if
it's been 6 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been 12, but it's not since the claiming.
I've had more support of strangers at the bus stop than like this price action. But like, yeah, I think if I was to like, that would be what I was looking for. And I think the invalidation for that is like, if we started solidly breaking below these lows and price started accepting below here, so we started spending considerable time below 1.1, I would probably cut buys from 1.1 to 1.2. At that point, this is just an estimate based on, like, basically I'm pulling it out of thin air. But I had like 60 to 80 cents as an idea in my head to go, if we really did tank this off, that would be an area. I don't think it does that particularly, but if it did, I'm just going to mention these. I'm going to mention these prices, and I hope people don't take them out of context. But 60 to 80 cents below that would be 30. Those are just kind of pulled out my ass. I personally think there's a good chance these lows hold.
$1's a huge psychological level, I think. But yeah, of course, save some capital. Like if you're looking at getting an entry, save 20-30% of your like ideal allocation just in case we go down to 70. And if we don't, and we look really strong and start to form higher lows, like at $1, $1.20, then you can just enter in a bit higher. But save yourself potentially if we do.
What it says, I think if we go up to like $2 or something the next couple of days, there's a much better chance that $1 level is probably a bottom. Because then if we look at these other charts, like again, OP was a pretty brutal one. So it's hard to say, right? Oh God, I'm still on the 15-minute chart. That's not helpful. So like this had that push up. And then, yeah, I mean, obviously the timing of this was the major crypto bear market. So context is important.
They launched a terrible market.
Yeah, I think again, if you think like Bitcoin ever, like if Bitcoin starts losing, like breaking back inside that like low 20K range and we start pulling down to new lows, I know people don't want to think about it here. I'm not particularly stressed about it here, but if we do, obviously you need to reconsider these trades. And that's where like Arbitrum might go to those low levels I spoke about, right? I think,
and then you just have levels that you cut. You have invalidation levels where you just,
exactly. Again, you kind of wait
below 25 again. Obviously,
yeah, I'd wait for price to develop. Like if it does drop to 60 cents, I might blind buy like 10% or something. But again, we'd look for that kind of accumulation pattern that we spoke about on OP to form. So if we did have a big sell-off, so let's say the price started here, and this is like where we are currently. We push up to 2, and then we have a sell-off on Arbitrum. So pretend this is Arbitrum, and price starts doing this. You don't really want to catch knives too much, or at least I don't. As we mentioned, we kind of just want to look for something that looks like a nice bottom with a push up, and then we get these higher lows here. Again, personally, I'm not too fussed about buying. Like, I don't need to buy 6 cents. If I can buy 8 cents with more confidence,
yeah,
that's probably better. It's better for my mental health. I'm less likely to dump it if we pull this move, because I mean, if you bought it 6 cents and price goes to here, you didn't sell and it does this, I think a lot of people probably sell and say, look, you're still in profit, but you kind of haven't got any structure to go off. So I don't mind being patient for this kind of price action long term. And again, for me, it's less about like the number and more about, the the patterns we see. Obviously, like if we go up to $10, I'll probably be selling, because then I'd start to go, okay, this might be valued a little highly short term. But yeah, as you said, this range here of like $1, I think long term sounds like a good bet. So as long as these lows hold, I'll be a buyer from 1.1 to 1.2. If they break considerably, I will cut, and I would be waiting for price to develop with those kind of like ranges I mentioned just in mind. As like,
and if that happens, based on the current Arbitrum valuation of, similar to Optimism around Matic, if that happens, I think it would probably happen not in the context of an Arbitrum issue, but like a general market sell-off that sees Matic down, 50, or maybe not 50%, but 20, 30% as well. Then Arbitrum
exactly.
Because unless there's some huge issue with Arbitrum, or like TVL dries up, which I don't think is going to happen, probably be in the context of a broader sell-off.
Exactly. Sure. I think it's a reasonable comparison to like bear in mind, is like, as you're looking at it, as you mentioned, to kind of go, right, like how is this current valuation doing against something like Optimism? And do I think that's fair? Do the metrics line up? Do the users match up? That's kind of like a really nice way to look for long-term buys. And yeah, as I said, equally, if we go up from here, maybe we never revisit these lows and I'm left coping. Maybe we go up to here, distribute, and then we start forming a low here. If that same price action starts developing here, I'll buy here, because I've got the same invalidation, right? Like, sure, it's not a perfect entry, but I can buy here. Apologies for the terrible drawing. But like, I can buy here.
If this plays out.
Yeah. And if it starts going back up, well, great. I've got my exposure to Arbitrum. And I know that if we ever like break below this level, then I can cut it. And that's fine as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I think the most important thing for me is like, just being conscious of where you're wrong. And that's kind of, as I said, what I think about.
Dropped from 11 to 130, but what you have to understand is that initial hours worth of price action was just complete rubbish, because liquidity was so dry on those exchanges that like orders were just wicking. So like you can't really that first candle is almost unfortunate it even exists, because you may as well just delete it. It doesn't mean anything.
If anything, it just ruins. It makes charting really hard, because every time you zoom out, it just expands the chart.
I know.
I got a screenshot today of it on Uniswap at $97, and I was like coping massively. I was sitting there like bashing the buttons, like
look at this 106 on Python.
Yeah, I was like, I know this won't work, but please sell it here, please.
Sell. There was no perp, so you couldn't short. You couldn't short 100. There was no liquidity, so you couldn't even sell, even if you had the tokens. Like maybe one token sold at 106. Like nothing.
Yeah, I think
really.
The highest I saw on chain was a wallet that dropped through at about $10. Is the highest I saw
that.
Yeah.
Legend. Someone liked you in the comments. Nasha.
That's always appreciated.
The feedback's been good. I think everyone should go and give you a follow in the description after the show as well.
Sweet.
So I think we'll leave it here for now, because we've covered a lot. We've been on for an hour and 20. We've covered heaps. I think I'd love to have you back on one day when we probably when we get another big market move and some stuff starts to develop, we can reassess and have a look at what you're looking at, etc.
We can look back at this price action and realize how wrong we were about everything. It's basically what I end up doing, going like, oh yeah, there's what I thought would happen, and then the market does something completely different.
This period, it'll be interesting to look back on this period, because this is like a pretty defining point for a lot of things in crypto, actually, in terms of like not only the way US is regulating, but also macro. Like it's macro's on a knife's edge. It's really the most volatile it's ever been, and then also we're at major resistance. So this is pretty pivotal.
Everything's kind of like a place where like people go, so what are you doing right now? I'm like, I'm kind of sitting here and like taking small day trades where I can and waiting to see what happens, because I don't particularly feel like guessing massive. Like we've had an amazing couple of months, and I think that's something perhaps at the end here, this is something I speak about a lot. Like if you've missed a lot of these moves, I think there's like a feeling that you really want to jump in. There's like FOMO to be like, I need to get something out of this market. And it's kind of like the most risky time to be doing it. So I think it's sometimes like just be patient and recognize there's going to be other opportunities in future. And yeah, there's always more opportunities. This market's wild. So I think that's where people go wrong, is like they'll enter up here chasing something when actually this is probably the time to just sit back and chill. Like if you've missed the last 3 months, it's okay. Everyone misses stuff. Like I missed shorting a bunch of stuff last year, and you kind of just need to accept it and go, we'll find something else. And whilst the market's uncertain, do I really want to be gambling a ton of my money up here? Even if you think it goes to like 40K from here in the next couple of months, is buying 28.5K in your game plan? Would you have done that 3 months ago if someone asked? And
that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with just being patient for that. And yeah, I think if you go onto like the yearly chart, you can see we're literally at some yearly opens. There's so much confluence around like 28 to 32K that if we did go above it, I think it'd be a really interesting pivot point, because whilst we're above it and we retest it, that would be bullish. And if we actually broke back below it, that would be a really good sign to exit the market again. It's kind of what we saw last year. If you remember, like Q1 last year, we actually had a really bullish couple of months. Like Solana went back to 160. It's just before like Luna collapsed. Everything was actually pumping. And I remember calling it at the time, and I definitely didn't trade it, but kind of one of those I look back on and going, I was right, but didn't matter. It's like Bitcoin went above the yearly open, and we then distributed above. It was like 45K. And then once we closed below, everything sold off so hard, and you didn't get much time to get out. And that tends to be the way these markets work. Like once something like gets above a certain price point and then back below it, the reversals can be really strong, because you have a ton of people offside, a ton of liquidity is trapped, and people just want to exit, right? So whether it's going up, because we saw that on the flip side this year, once that FTX candle got bought back up, we just sent straight up, because you saw a load of people who were waiting for reclaims of range lows. Everyone bought back in, and equally a ton of people who were short were getting out of their shorts. So
here's the other thing.
Yeah.
People have survived, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for this. If you're watching this video, you've literally survived, and I'll get the chart back looking good. The worst Bitcoin candle in history, and I'm not talking percentages, I'm talking dollar-wise, by far the worst Bitcoin candle ever. That is the worst. Going to 2022, could we have imagined a yearly candle that bad? Like, you wouldn't have thought it was possible. Like, it was, you've survived and you're still here. Like, that's got to count for something. It has to.
Yeah, it was pretty tough.
Horrible candle.
Yeah, I feel like stepping out now is like the wrong thing to do. And I think actually what these last couple of months showed me, I kind of thought this already, but it's really nice to have this confluence. Even if you missed these opportunities, is to go, as long as like regulation or like Armageddon doesn't completely destroy crypto, if like that 1% or 5% thing doesn't happen, if you believe this market will still be there, what's this kind of shown me is like FTX can collapse, everything can happen, Luna blows up, all the worst thing in the world can happen. And as soon as we get a bit of positive momentum, there is a ton of money to be made in alts again. So even if I think even if we never went back to all-time highs, which look, I think we will in time, but if we didn't, there will still be great opportunities in this market for people if you're kind of paying attention. And I think the last couple of months have shown that. I mean, how many 10x's, how many 100x's have there been? And you don't need to catch all of them, but catch one or two of them and you're having a good time. So yeah, I think this is, regardless of where we go from here, the last couple of months for me has been a very positive sign that as long as the very worst doesn't happen, this industry can bounce back. And we're all still complete degenerate gamblers who will definitely throw our money into like new launches. So there'll always be opportunity.
Oh, for sure. No, I think that's a great way to end it. I think that sums it up perfectly. Well, thanks so much for joining.
No, not at all, man. Thanks for having me on.
Hopefully see you again soon, and I'll wrap up here with the viewers, and yeah, everyone go follow Tnut. See you later.
Great. Cheers, man. Thank you.
Super informative stream, guys. Super, like we covered a lot. And obviously go follow Tnut. Thanks to him for joining the stream and sharing his alpha. I see you guys in the comments really enjoyed some of his insights. I got a couple questions as well about where you can buy Arbitrum and if you want to trade Arbitrum. There's a few different options. I think for the spot guys, your best bet's probably like an aggregator like KyberSwap, simply because you can go onto the ARB network and then like swap into ARB and get it aggregated. That kind of stops you from, or at least will like route you the best route to get you the best price. For some reason, the ETH trade route's not so good. Let's try USDC. Should get you the best amount, like around, I think 0.74. Oh no, because that's $1 into ARB. So yeah, let's see what the price is on ARB to USDC. Around $1.38. So it's basically using 1 inch, or you can use Uniswap, but KyberSwap will aggregate it. So that would be my answer for the people that want to use like a DEX. If you want to trade Arbitrum, like leverage or on a centralized exchange, there's 2 places that I think are best to do it. One, I would say, is Bybit, because they've currently got ARB incentives. I think $400,000 worth of incentives for people that deposit and trade. So, and we also have a $30,000 sign up bonus in the description if you want to use that. So that would be the first place I would look at trading ARB. And then the second place is OKX. They also just got their perp listing. And obviously we have the huge giveaway going on. We've got the iPhone in a few days, and then we've got the MacBook Pro, and then of course the Tesla at the end of the trading comp. So if you kind of want to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, enter the giveaway whilst trading Arbitrum, then OKX is another place you can trade it. So there's a link in the description to that as well. I think that pretty much covers things. I think that covers all the questions. Some people, yeah, I think that does answer all the questions. You guys seem to like the guest as well, so that's awesome. And until next time, I will see you tomorrow for a pre-record on the top 10 airdrops to look out for in 2023 and beyond. If they take a while, but it should be 2023. All right, guys, thanks for the support. I'll see you in the next one. Have a lovely day. Peace out.